Security, get this woman out of here!
I'll leave when I'm ready.
This is outrageous. You have no authority here.
You don't belong in this room. This meeting is for people who actually run this company.
Who exactly told you?
Who do you think you are?
This seat belonged to Robert Haynes. Before Robert, it belonged to me. I own 51% of Apex Motors. I know about Titan, I know about the side deal, I know about the 220...
That's a lie! You can't do this! You don't have the authority!
Activate the Cornerstone Clause.
Executive authority. James Whitfield, you forgot whose company this was.
This isn't over!
No. It ended the moment you forgot whose company this was.
Although she held the largest share of the company, Natalie was left sitting outside the boardroom and was nearly betrayed behind her back. Her entire career was almost destroyed by a group of crooks.
Watch what Natalie does to punish the people behind this scheme. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and watch until the end to see how it all turns out.
Natalie Carter stepped out of the taxi on Michigan Avenue and looked up. 42 floors of glass and steel rose above the Detroit skyline, catching the morning light in a way that was almost beautiful. Near the top, in brushed steel letters 3 feet tall, her name was still there. Carter Tower. It had been 5 years since she last stood on this sidewalk. 5 years since she had walked through those revolving doors as someone who belonged. She stood still for a moment, letting the cold October air settle around her. Something felt wrong. Not the building itself, the architecture was the same, the steel was the same. It was something underneath, something she could feel, before she could name. The way you feel the temperature of a room change, before you understand why. Apex Motors. She and Robert Haynes had built it, from a rented machine shop in a Detroit suburb, with no investors, no inheritance, and no guarantee that any of it would work. Robert was a mechanical engineer from Ohio who had turned down offers from 3 major automakers to bet on a dream that most of the industry thought was naive. They believed that the future of the American automobile was electric, not as a luxury for the wealthy, but as a practical, accessible technology for everyone. They believed that disrupting a 100-year-old industry was not only possible but necessary. And 16 years later, Apex Motors was valued at $14 billion. Natalie took a breath and crossed the street. She was dressed simply, a black suit, no jewelry except a thin gold watch that had belonged to her mother, no designer bag. She had made this choice deliberately. She had not called ahead. She had not alerted her lawyers. She had flown from her home in Boston to Detroit on a commercial flight, taken a taxi from the airport, and walked up to the front entrance of the building that carried her name, as if she were anyone. She wanted to see what they would see when they looked at her. She was about to find out. 3 weeks earlier, an email had arrived in her private inbox, the address she had used only for personal correspondence, never published, never shared with the company. There was no sender name, no signature. The subject line read, asterisk, they sold your dream. Asterisk inside were documents. 2 sets of financial reports for the same fiscal quarters, 1 set presented to the board of directors, and 1 set that reflected what had actually happened. The discrepancy was not subtle. Hundreds of millions of dollars had been redirected, reclassified, and obscured in ways that would require forensic accounting to fully untangle. But the broad shape of it was unmistakable. Along with the financial records were a series of internal emails between James Whitfield, the CEO, and Marcus Aldridge, the COO. The emails detailed negotiations with Titan Automotive Group, a conglomerate that controlled nearly 20% of the domestic gasoline vehicle market, the same industry Apex Motors had been built to challenge. The proposed sale price was $3.5 billion below the company's current market valuation. In exchange, Whitfield and Aldridge would receive personal equity stakes in Titan worth a combined $220 million. The email from the anonymous sender ended with a single line, asterisk, you have until the end of the month. After that, the paperwork gets filed. Asterisk Natalie spent 2 weeks verifying every document. She hired an independent forensic accountant and a cybersecurity firm. Everything checked out. Every signature was authentic. Every number was real. She also figured out who had sent the email. Daniel Park had been with Apex Motors for 11 years. He had joined as a junior attorney when the company was still small enough that everyone knew everyone's name. Over the years he had become the head of the legal department, one of the few people in senior leadership who had worked directly under her and Robert. When Robert died of a sudden heart attack 3 years ago, not cancer, not a slow decline, but a Wednesday afternoon, and then nothing, Daniel had been one of the people who stood at the graveside and wept without embarrassment. He had risked his career, and possibly more, to reach her. That meant something. She did not contact him before she flew to Detroit. She did not want to put him in a more dangerous position than he was already in. She simply boarded the plane and came back to the city where everything had started. The revolving doors pushed cold air against her face as she entered the lobby. It was different from how she remembered it. The warm oak paneling she had chosen in the early years had been replaced with white marble and polished glass. The lobby felt like a financial institution now, impressive, sterile, designed to communicate power rather than purpose. On the wall, where 2 photographs had once hung side by side, herself and Robert at the machine shop, grinning like people who had no idea what they were getting into, there was now a single large portrait. James Whitfield, silver-haired and composed, framed as if he had built this empire himself. Natalie walked to the reception desk. The receptionist was a young woman named Ashley Monroe, whose expression performed a rapid and practiced assessment as Natalie approached. The assessment lasted less than a second, but Natalie had spent a lifetime learning to read what happened inside that second. A middle-aged black woman in a plain suit. No badge. No escort. Nothing that signaled importance. Can I help you? I'm here for the executive board meeting. Ashley's eyes moved briefly over Natalie's clothes, her bag, her lack of anything that would mark her as someone who belonged on an executive floor. Do you have an appointment? No. I'm sorry, but the executive level requires prior authorization. Who are you here to see? Before Natalie could answer, another woman appeared from the elevator bank. Late 30s, sharp eyes behind understated glasses, a tablet pressed to her chest. Her lanyard read Sandra Cole, executive assistant. Sandra glanced at Natalie with the efficient appraisal of someone who had spent years managing access to powerful people. Is there a problem? She says she's here for the board meeting, Ashley said, but she doesn't have an appointment. Sandra turned to Natalie. There was no recognition in her expression. Why would there be? She had joined the company 2 years ago, long after Natalie had faded from the daily narrative of Apex Motors. She was looking at a middle-aged black woman in a plain suit, who had walked into the executive lobby of a major corporation, without an appointment or an escort. The conclusion she drew was instantaneous and, in her mind, reasonable. Ma'am, the executive board is in a private session. They can't be disturbed. If you'd like to leave your contact information, someone will follow up with you. I'll wait, Natalie said. Sandra hesitated, then gestured toward a row of chairs along the hallway leading to the executive wing. You can wait, over there, but I should let you know it could be quite a while. It's an important meeting. Natalie nodded and walked to the chairs. The leather was cold against her back. From where she sat, she could see, through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls of the main boardroom. 14 men sat around a long conference table. All white faces, with one exception, at the far end of the table, pushed to the margin, as if he had been slowly moved there, over time, sat Daniel Park. His hands were flat on the table. His face was pale. On the screen behind James Whitfield was a logo Natalie recognized immediately. Titan Automotive Group. The deal was already in the room. She looked at her watch. 1 minute. Employees walked past her, without a second glance. Some looked at her the way people look at something that doesn't quite fit, a brief flicker of attention, then nothing. A black woman sitting alone in the executive hallway, with no badge, and no escort. Not someone who mattered. The assumption was, so automatic it didn't even register, as an assumption. 2 minutes. Through the glass, she watched Whitfield move, through his presentation, with the ease of a man who believed every decision had already been made. Aldrich sat beside him, leaning back in his chair, one hand resting on the table, with the relaxed confidence of a man who had stopped worrying about being caught. 3 minutes. A memory surfaced that she had not thought about in years. The machine shop in 2009, a February night, so cold that the space heaters weren't keeping up. She and Robert sitting on the floor, because they had sold the furniture to make payroll. A pizza box between them. Robert looking at the blueprint spread across the concrete, his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, talking about what kind of company they wanted to build. Not just what it would make, but what it would mean. A company is a culture, before it's a product, he had said. Asterisk, if we get the culture wrong, nothing else matters. Asterisk 4 minutes. She thought about the 5 years she had been away. After Robert died, she had kept her promise to step back. She had remained the majority shareholder, 51%, but she had honored the idea that the company needed to find its own direction, without her hovering over it. She had focused on her education foundation, which had built schools and scholarship programs in underserved communities across the country. She had grieved. She had trusted. And she had not been watching closely enough. 5 minutes. Sandra Cole passed by again, glancing at Natalie, with an expression that was not unkind, just something close to pity. Asterisk poor woman. She has no idea she's wasting her time. Asterisk Natalie felt the full weight of it in that moment. Not just the betrayal. Not just the money. The erasure. The way they had quietly removed her name, from every wall, and every conversation, until she existed only, as a line in the ownership documents. The way Sandra and Ashley had looked at her, and completed a story about who she was, before she had spoken 10 words. The way the world had always looked at women who looked like her. 6 minutes. She stood up. There were 2 paths. She could walk out of the building, return to her lawyers, and spend the next several months fighting the sale, through legal channels, while Whitfield and Aldrich completed their paperwork, and walked away wealthy. Or she could open that door and remind the people inside it of something they had apparently forgotten. Natalie Carter had spent her entire life being underestimated. As a black girl in a school system that expected nothing from her. As a young engineer in rooms full of men, who directed their questions to her white male partner. As a founder, who watched investors ignore her to address Robert, as if he were the real architect of everything they had built together. She had learned, over decades, to treat that underestimation not as a wound, but as a kind of invisibility cloak. Let them think you are small. Let them think you have gone away. And when they are not looking, walk back through the door, and take back what they thought they had taken. She straightened her jacket. She walked toward the boardroom. The door swung open, and every head in the room turned at once. James Whitfield stopped mid-sentence. His hand, which had been gesturing toward the Titan logo on the presentation screen, froze in the air. 14 pairs of eyes fixed on the woman in the doorway, a black woman in a plain black suit, no badge, no escort, no apparent reason to be there. Marcus Aldrich spoke first. His voice carried the sharp, reflexive authority of a man who was unaccustomed to interruptions, and considered his own irritation sufficient justification for anything. "Excuse me. This is a private meeting. Who authorized you to come in here?" Natalie did not answer. She stepped into the room, and let the door close behind her. She moved slowly along the length of the table, making eye contact with the faces she passed. Most of them she did not recognize, Whitfield's people, hired over the past 5 years to replace anyone who might remember a different version of what this company was supposed to be. At the far end of the table, Daniel Park had gone completely still. His eyes met hers for a fraction of a second, and in that fraction she saw everything she needed to know. He was terrified. He was relieved. He had been waiting for this moment. Whitfield rose from his chair, buttoning his jacket, with the practiced calm of a man who had never once doubted his authority over any room he entered. "Ma'am, I don't know how you got past security, but this is an executive board meeting. I need you to leave immediately." Natalie looked at him. She looked at him the way you look at something you want to understand completely, before you decide what to do with it. 5 years ago, this man had stood at Robert's funeral, and delivered a speech about legacy, about stewardship, about carrying the torch with humility. He had shaken her hand afterward, and told her that Robert's vision was safe with him. "I'll leave when I'm ready," she said. The words landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Aldrich's jaw tightened. Two of the younger executives exchanged a glance of genuine confusion. People did not speak to James Whitfield this way. Not in this building, not in any room he occupied. Sandra Cole appeared in the doorway, breathless. "Mr. Whitfield, I'm so sorry." She was waiting in the hallway, and I told her the meeting was private, but I'm calling security right now. "Do that," Aldrich said, without looking up. But Natalie was already moving. She walked past the row of executives, past the leather chairs, and the crystal water glasses, and the legal pads, with expensive pens, that no one ever actually used. She walked directly to the head of the table. To the chair, where James Whitfield had been sitting. The chair that had once belonged to Robert Haynes. The chair that, before Robert, had belonged to her. "That seat," she said, her voice quiet, but completely clear. "Who told you that you could sit in it?" Whitfield's composure cracked, just for a moment, just a hairline fracture, before he recovered. "I am the CEO of this company. I sit where I choose. You are the CEO, because I allowed you to be." Natalie pulled the chair out, and sat down. "This seat belonged to Robert Haynes. Before Robert, it belonged to me. And according to the company charter I drafted, with my own hands in 2008, it still belongs to me." The silence in the room was total. 14 men stared at the black woman, who had just taken the chairman's seat, as if she had always owned it. Because she had. Whitfield's face flushed. "I don't know who you think you are, but this behavior is completely inappropriate. Security is on their way, and I strongly suggest you leave, before this becomes a legal matter." Natalie folded her hands on the table. "My name is Natalie Carter. I am the co-founder of Apex Motors. I hold 51% of this company. And I have just spent 6 minutes sitting in the hallway of a building that carries my name, being treated as if I don't belong here." She looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. "So let me ask you, gentlemen, who exactly doesn't belong in this room?" The name detonated in the room like something compressed, finally releasing pressure. Natalie Carter. The founder. The woman whose photograph used to hang in the lobby, before Whitfield had it quietly removed 18 months ago. Most of the people at this table had never met her. She was a ghost, a name on the original incorporation documents, a face in archived company videos that no one watched. She was not supposed to be real. She was not supposed to be sitting in that chair. At the far end of the table, Daniel Park exhaled for what seemed like the first time since she had walked in. Whitfield was not a man who surrendered. He had spent 5 years methodically consolidating power, replacing board members, removing anyone who asked difficult questions, building a leadership team that answered only to him. He had done it slowly, carefully, in increments small enough that each one could be rationalized on its own. He was not going to let one unexpected arrival undo all of that. "Miss Carter," he said, resetting his voice to something resembling measured respect, "we all acknowledge your foundational role in this company. Your contributions were extraordinary. But you stepped back from operational leadership 5 years ago. The board and I have been running Apex Motors since then, and I believe our results demonstrate the strength of that leadership." Aldridge leaned forward, sensing an opening. "With respect, Miss Carter, your current role is that of a shareholder. Shareholders attend the annual meeting. They don't walk into executive sessions and occupy the chairman's chair. Is that so?" It was not a question. Natalie reached into her bag and drew out a thick manila folder. She laid it on the table and spread it open, revealing layer after layer of documents. Internal emails between Whitfield and Aldridge discussing the Titan sale. Dual-track financial records showing systematic misrepresentation to the board. Projections demonstrating that the company was being deliberately undervalued in preparation for the deal. And at the bottom of the stack, a printed transcript. "This is from a meeting the two of you held 6 months ago," Natalie said, resting her finger on the transcript. "Just the two of you, in this building, in this room. You believed no one was listening." She read aloud, "Carter is gone. She disappeared years ago, and she's never coming back. As far as this company is concerned, she's a name on a filing. We run this company now." Aldridge's face shifted. "Where did you get that?" "That recording is, possibly inadmissible in court," Natalie said. "But entirely admissible in this room." She picked up her phone, dialed a number, and placed it face up on the table. A woman's voice answered, "Board Secretary's office, Margaret Owen speaking." "Margaret, this is Natalie Carter. I am invoking Article 8, Section 4. Authorization Code Robert 0411. A 2-second pause. Confirmed. The cornerstone clause is now active, as of 10:52 a.m. All executive authority is transferred to the majority shareholder pending review. Shall I notify the legal department and outside counsel?" "Yes. I want everything documented and airtight within the hour." "Understood, Miss Carter." Natalie ended the call and set the phone down. The color had left Whitfield's face. Aldridge was gripping the armrests of his chair the way a man grips something when the floor drops away beneath him. The cornerstone clause, they had heard of it, buried somewhere in the original company charter, a relic from the early years, when Apex Motors was small enough to fail. Something the founders had written as a safeguard. Something that no one had ever imagined would actually be used. 2 security guards appeared in the doorway. Both middle-aged, both looking at the room, with the slightly unfocused expression of people who had walked into something they did not yet understand. "Mr. Whitfield," one of them said uncertainly, "you called for security?" Aldridge pointed at Natalie. "Remove this woman from the building immediately. She's trespassing." The guards hesitated. They looked at the black woman sitting in the chairman's seat. They looked at the white men standing around the table, with varying degrees of panic on their faces. Something in the geometry of the room did not add up. Natalie looked at the guards calmly. "You can stay. I may need witnesses." She turned back to the table. "James Whitfield. Marcus Aldridge. You are both terminated, effective immediately, for gross breach of fiduciary duty, financial misrepresentation to the board of directors, and conspiracy to defraud the company's shareholders for personal gain. You will be escorted from this building within 30 minutes. Your access to all company systems was revoked 14 minutes ago. If either of you attempts to remove, transfer, or destroy any documents, files, or proprietary information, you will be referred for criminal prosecution. Whitfield's voice came out wrong, too high, too tight. You can't do this. We have contracts. We have legal counsel. This will not stand. Then sue me, Natalie said. But by the time your attorneys file their first motion, the evidence in this folder will be on the desk of every financial regulator in this country. I imagine they'll find the $220 million side arrangement, with Titan Automotive particularly interesting. She looked around the table at the faces that had gone silent. I want to ask everyone else in this room a question. Not to punish you. To understand. She spoke slowly, making sure each word reached the corners of the room. Did any of you know about this arrangement? Did any of you see something that didn't add up and choose not to ask? Did any of you feel, at any point, that something was wrong with the direction this company was taking? No one answered. Several people looked at the table. Others stared straight ahead at nothing. Only Daniel Park looked directly at her, and in his expression she saw something complicated, relief, yes, but also something that looked like shame. The shame of a person who had waited too long. Natalie stood. Anyone involved in this scheme should leave with Mr. Whitfield and Mr. Aldridge. Those of you who were not involved will speak with me privately. I need to understand who in this company still remembers what we were built to do. Daniel Park stood up from his seat at the far end of the table. He walked the length of the room, passing the stunned faces of his colleagues, and stopped in front of Natalie. I sent you the email, he said quietly. I didn't know if you would come. She looked at him, this man, who had been slowly pushed to the margins, because he had refused to pretend that what was happening was acceptable. Who had risked his career, his reputation, and potentially more to reach someone who might not have been reachable. You did the right thing, Daniel. That took real courage. At the door, Whitfield turned. His face had moved past humiliation into something harder. This isn't over, Carter. You've been gone for 5 years. You don't know what this company needs anymore. You'll destroy everything we've built. Natalie watched him go. When the door closed, she turned to the window. Detroit spread out below her, a city that had been rebuilt from wreckage more than once. The city where she and Robert had started, with a rented machine shop and a conviction that the American automobile industry needed to be reimagined from the inside out. 6 minutes in a hallway. That was all it had taken to understand how far things had gone. Now came the harder work of finding out what was still worth saving. The news broke before noon. By 1 o'clock, every financial network was running the same headline: Apex Motors in turmoil, after founder returns, fires executive team. The stock fell 11% before the markets closed. Analysts speculated about hostile takeovers, operational paralysis, and whether a company could survive a leadership decapitation of this scale. Inside Carter Tower, the reality was more complicated than any of the headlines. Natalie was standing in the Cybersecurity Operations Center on the 31st floor, when the lead engineer turned from his monitors, with an expression she had learned over 16 years to associate with near disasters that had been caught in time. Someone initiated a mass deletion protocol approximately 22 minutes ago, he said. Research files, patent documentation, the entire next-generation battery division archive. If we hadn't locked the system, when you activated the cornerstone clause, 5 years of R&D would have been gone. Who initiated it? Authorization came from Marcus Aldridge's account. Remote trigger, activated from his phone, before security confiscated it. Daniel Park, standing beside Natalie, shook his head slowly. He was going to burn it down rather than let anyone else have it. He was going to sell it, Natalie corrected. The deletion was a contingency. If the Titan deal fell through, destroying the intellectual property would have ensured that the technology couldn't be leveraged against them in the market. She turned to the engineer. What about client data? Someone attempted external access to the customer database 14 minutes ago. We blocked it, before they could download anything significant, but there was approximately 30 seconds of active connection, before the lockdown triggered. We've rotated all credentials, and put the system in full isolation. Nothing moves without your personal authorization, until further notice. I want a forensic audit of every file accessed, copied, or deleted in the past 8 months. And I want a complete list of everyone who held administrator-level privileges, not just executives. Everyone. She walked out of the security center, into the hallway. The floor was quiet in the way floors get quiet, when everyone inside knows something large has happened, and no one, yet knows what it means for them. People were at their desks, speaking in low voices, refreshing news sites, wondering if they would still have jobs by the end of the week. Sandra Cole was waiting near the elevator. She looked different from the woman who had directed Natalie to the hallway chairs that morning. The professional composure was still there, but underneath it something had shifted. "Miss Carter," she said. "I'd like to speak with you for a moment, if you're willing." Natalie stopped. She remembered this face. The quick assessment. The polite redirection. The assumption made in less than 2 seconds, before a single question had been asked. "Go ahead." Sandra took a breath. "I owe you an apology. This morning, when you came in, I made a decision about who you were, before I had any information about who you were. I looked at you, and I decided you weren't important. I sent you to the hallway." She met Natalie's eyes directly, which required visible effort. "I've been thinking about that all morning. About how automatic it was. How I didn't even notice myself doing it." Natalie studied her for a long moment. "Sandra, you weren't wrong, because you didn't recognize me. You were wrong, because you looked at me, and decided I wasn't worth the effort of recognition. Those are two different things." She spoke, without anger, with something more like precision. The first is a gap in information. The second is a habit of judgment. And the reason that habit matters is not because of what it meant for me this morning. It's because you have been applying that same habit to people your entire professional life, and most of them did not have a charter clause that gave them a way to walk back in. Sandra was quiet. The person you send to the hallway is not always the founder. Sometimes they are. Sometimes they are an engineer, with an idea that could change your company's direction. Sometimes they are a job candidate who would have been extraordinary. Sometimes they are just a person who deserved to be asked their name. Natalie paused. The cost of that habit is invisible to you, because you never find out who those people were. They just disappear. Sandra nodded slowly. "I understand. I'm going to need people around me who can see things differently. Who can catch themselves in those moments before they make the assumption. Are you capable of that?" Sandra straightened. "Yes, ma'am. I am." "Then I'll see you tomorrow morning." That afternoon, Natalie called Thomas Garrett, the CEO of Titan Automotive Group. She did not spend time on preamble. "The arrangement with Whitfield and Aldridge is dead," she said. "If Titan makes any further attempt to contact Apex Motors employees, acquire our technology through alternative channels, or interfere with our operations in any form, I will personally make certain that every regulator, journalist, and investor in this industry understands exactly how your company does business." I have the documentation to support everything I would say. Garrett tried to negotiate. He offered a higher price. He suggested a strategic partnership model instead of an acquisition. He implied, in the practiced way of men, who have always had leverage, that opposing him would cost more than cooperating with him. Natalie was quiet for a moment. Mr. Garrett, I built this company, because I believed the gasoline vehicle industry was overdue for disruption. You built your conglomerate by buying and dismantling every clean energy company that threatened your market share before it could grow large enough to compete. We have never been in the same business. We are not going to start now. She ended the call. This was the lesson she had not been able to articulate to herself, until that moment. Not every door that opens is a door worth walking through. Knowing what you are built for, and being willing to refuse everything that contradicts it, regardless of the price attached, is not stubbornness. It is integrity with a backbone. Over the next 3 weeks, Natalie did something that surprised the executive floor. She stopped attending executive meetings. Instead, she went to the factory floor in the mornings. She ate lunch in the employee cafeteria. She sat in the engineering labs and asked questions, without an agenda. She met with department managers, senior technicians, project leads, and administrative staff, who had never once been invited into a leadership conversation. She listened far more than she spoke. What she heard was painful to absorb. The mission had been diluted, so gradually that most people had not noticed it happening, until it was already done. The company's public commitment to developing affordable electric vehicles for the broad consumer market had been quietly deprioritized in favor of high-margin luxury models that generated better quarterly numbers. The research division working on next-generation battery technology, the work that could have genuinely transformed the cost curve for electric vehicles, had been chronically underfunded, while resources were redirected toward cosmetic redesigns of existing product lines. People who had asked too many questions had been managed out. Good engineers had left, because the culture that had once made Apex Motors feel like a place worth building your career had been replaced by something colder and more political. The message, transmitted through 100 small daily signals, had been clear: keep your head down, deliver your numbers, and don't ask why. But there were still people who believed. There was Kevin Torres, a mechanical engineer, who had joined Apex straight out of graduate school, because he had read about the company's founding mission, and wanted to be part of it. There was Dr. Linda Foster, the head of materials research, who had stayed, through 5 years of budget cuts, because she was 3 years away from a battery breakthrough she refused to abandon. There was Marcus Webb, no relation to anyone, a line supervisor at the Detroit manufacturing plant, who had quietly protected his team from the worst of the cultural erosion by simply refusing to let the people who worked for him be treated as interchangeable units. These were the people Natalie had come back to find. She appointed Daniel Park as interim CEO. Not because he was the most conventional choice. Because he was the person who, when faced with the choice between his own safety and doing what was right, had chosen correctly, even though it had taken him longer than he wished. That kind of moral reckoning, she had learned, was worth more in a leader than any credential. You waited too long, she told him directly, on the afternoon she offered him the role. You know that. I know, he said. Why? Daniel was quiet for a moment. Because I kept thinking someone else would do it. Someone with more standing. Someone who had less to lose. He looked at her. And I kept telling myself that staying inside was better than leaving, that I could do more good by not burning the bridge. But I wasn't doing any good. I was just staying. Natalie nodded. That's the thing about moral compromise. Every day you tell yourself it's temporary, and every day it becomes a little more permanent. The bridge you're afraid to burn becomes the cage you're living in. She paused. Don't let that happen again. I need a CEO who is willing to have the conversation that costs something. Not someone who waits until there's no other choice. Daniel held her gaze. Understood. The 6-week mark brought a different kind of reckoning. Kevin Torres had been one of the first people to come to Natalie in the aftermath. He had asked to speak with her privately, and when she met him in a small conference room, he sat across from her with the expression of someone confessing something they had been carrying for too long. "I knew something was wrong with the financial reports," he said. "I have a finance background, I did a double major, before I switched to engineering. About 8 months ago, I was looking at a budget allocation for our division, and I caught what looked like a major discrepancy. I ran the numbers 3 times. They didn't add up." Natalie waited. "I told myself it wasn't my department. That there were people whose job it was to catch things like that. That if I raised it, and I was wrong, I would look paranoid. That if I raised it, and I was right, I would make myself a target." He stopped. "So I didn't say anything." Natalie looked at him for a long time. "Kevin, if you were walking to your car in the parking garage, and you saw a colleague about to step into the path of a vehicle they couldn't see, would you tell yourself it wasn't your department?" Kevin looked at the table. "A company is not a collection of job descriptions," she said. "It is a community of people who are responsible to each other. The accountant's fraud becomes the engineer's problem when the company collapses. The engineer's silence becomes everyone's loss when the information that could have stopped the collapse goes unspoken." She leaned forward slightly. "I am not angry at you, Kevin. You made the choice that fear teaches us to make. But I want you to understand, and I want you to carry this forward, that the cost of your silence was not zero. It is never zero. The question is just whether you can see who paid it." Kevin nodded. He didn't speak, but she could tell that something had shifted. This was what she had come back to build, not just a company with better financial controls, but a culture where people understood that integrity was not a personal virtue operating in isolation. It was a collective practice. It required witnesses who spoke, not just actors who chose correctly. On the 40th day, Natalie stood before the company. Not the leadership team. Not the board. Everyone. 8,000 employees filled the main atrium of Carter Tower. Thousands more watched on live streams from manufacturing plants and offices across the country. The room was silent in a way that large rooms are silent when they are genuinely paying attention. Natalie looked out at the faces, young and older, black and white and brown, engineers and accountants, and line workers, and administrative staff, the people who had come to work every day and built this company one day at a time, while the people at the top of the building made decisions they were never consulted about. 40 days ago, she began, I walked into this building for the first time in 5 years. No one recognized me. I was asked to wait in the hallway. She let that settle. I sat in that hallway for 6 minutes. And in those 6 minutes, I understood something that I should have been watching more carefully from the moment Robert Haynes died. This company had forgotten who it was. She thought of Robert. His laugh. His absolute, sometimes inconvenient conviction that every person in the organization had equal standing to raise a concern. The way he had treated the floor supervisor and the board member, as if their perspectives were equally necessary. Apex Motors was not built by people who believed that power was something you protected from below. It was built by a mechanical engineer from Ohio and a black woman from Detroit who had nothing in common except one thing: we believe that what you create matters more than who you are. We believe that the value of your contribution is the only measure that counts. She straightened. Robert is gone. But that belief does not get to die with him. Not because I say so. Because you are all still here. Because every person in this building, who stayed and worked, and protected what mattered to them was keeping that belief alive, even when the people at the top of this building were doing their best to make you forget it. The silence held. The 6 minutes I spent in that hallway ended one era. Today we begin another. We return to what this company was always supposed to be, an organization that exists to solve a real problem for real people. An organization where the person sitting in the chairman's seat and the person on the manufacturing floor are accountable to the same standard. An organization where you are not just permitted to speak up, you are expected to. The applause began slowly, then grew until it moved through the walls of the atrium like something physical. Natalie did not smile. She nodded once, and stepped back from the podium. The work was not finished. It had, in some ways, just truly begun. 2 months later, the stock had recovered fully, and risen 9% above its pre-crisis level. Daniel Park was confirmed as permanent CEO by the reconstituted board of directors. The leadership team had been rebuilt, from the inside, drawn from people who had been in the company long enough to remember what it was built for, and new additions chosen for demonstrated ability and willingness to challenge their own assumptions. The research division received its first full funding allocation in 4 years. Dr. Linda Foster sent Natalie a 3-line email that read, *, we are 3 years from the battery. Maybe 2. Thank you for coming back. *, in the lobby of Carter Tower, the portrait of James Whitfield was gone. In its place hung a single photograph, Natalie Carter and Robert Haynes in 2009, standing in front of a rented machine shop in suburban Detroit. Both of them smiling at something off camera. Both of them impossibly young, impossibly certain that what they were attempting was worth attempting. Beneath the photograph, the caption read, * founded by Natalie Carter and Robert Haynes, 2008. Built on the belief that what you create matters more than who you are. * Natalie was crossing the lobby on a Tuesday morning, when she noticed a young woman standing in front of the photograph. Early 20s, a new employee badge still stiff around her neck, hair pulled back, looking at the image, with the focused attention of someone trying to understand something rather than simply see it. She was black. She was young. She was standing in the building that Natalie had almost lost. Natalie stopped. The young woman turned and saw her, and her expression shifted in the way it shifts when a face matches a memory. "You're Natalie Carter." "I am." "I read about what happened. The 6 minutes in the hallway." She paused. "I applied to work here because of that story. Because of what you did." Natalie looked at her. "What's your name?" "Jasmine. Jasmine Reed. I started in the engineering division last week." "What made you want to work here, Jasmine?" The real answer, not the interview answer. Jasmine thought about it. "Because you came back," she said finally. "Because you had enough reason not to, you had your foundation, you had your life, you had people telling you it would be easier to fight, from the outside. And you walked through the front door anyway. With no announcement. In a plain suit." She glanced at the photograph. "That felt like something worth being part of." Natalie was quiet for a moment. "Then let me tell you something worth remembering, as you build your career here. You will have days when people look at you and don't see you. It will happen because of how you look, or how old you are, or what floor you work on, or simply because people are busy and careless and none of us are as generous with our attention as we should be. That is true. It will happen." Jasmine nodded. "The question is never how to avoid being invisible. The question is, who you decide to be in the moments when you are. And the other question, the one that matters just as much, is who you see when you are the one with the power to look." She held Jasmine's gaze. "When you are in a leadership chair someday, and you will be, if you want it, you will have the choice that everyone in this building had when I walked in 6 weeks ago. You can look at the person in front of you, and decide in 1 second who they are, and whether they matter. Or you can ask their name. You can take the 30 seconds to find out who is actually standing in your hallway. She paused. That choice, made 10 times a day, every day, for years, that is what a culture is made of. Not the mission statement on the wall. Not the values on the website. The choice, in the ordinary moment, to see the person in front of you. Jasmine was very still. I'll remember that. Make sure you do. Not for me. For the person who walks into your building one day, when you're not expecting them, who needs to be seen, before they can do what they came to do. Natalie walked toward the elevator. Behind her, she heard Jasmine turn back to the photograph. 2 founders in front of a machine shop in Detroit, at the beginning of something neither of them fully understood yet, smiling because the uncertainty felt like possibility. The elevator doors opened. Natalie stepped inside. 6 minutes in a hallway had changed everything. Not because they revealed something new, but because they made visible what had always been there, the ease with which power disappears a person, and the choice, always available, always costly, always worth it, to refuse to stay disappeared. The doors closed. Outside, in the lobby of Carter Tower, Jasmine Reed stood looking at the photograph of the 2 people who had started it all. And somewhere in the building above her, in labs and on factory floors, and in conference rooms, the work of building something worth building was quietly continuing. Apex Motors. Founded 2008. Still building. Asterisk.